Is it okay for Christians to read other religious holy books?
Where America is in Bible prophecy.
Women becoming pastors. And
anointing homes and praying over homes.
why would God have people tormented and burned for eternity?
What happened or where Jesus went after he died?
What is your opinion? What does the Bible say?
Welcome to Pastor's Perspective. We're here Monday through Friday taking your Bible questions. You can join the conversation with a question on end times, the Bible, or Christian living by calling 1-888-564-6173. That's 1-888-564-6173. By the way, you can also post your question and follow along at facebook.com/Pastor's Perspective. Here now is today's host.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Pastor's Perspective. Michael David here, and it is Truth Hour Thursday, so you have 2 hours to call in today. The first half of the program, the first hour of the program is going to be live, and you can get your questions answered when you call 888-564-6173. Again, that's 888-564-6173. If you don't get through on the first hour of the program, we do have a second hour that is not going to be aired right now. It's going to be recorded and then aired at a later date, and you can get your questions answered on the second half of the program. That'll be from 4 to 5 Pacific Time at 888-564-6173. On today's program, we have Brian Broderson of Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa in Southern California. You can learn more about him at backtobasicsradio.com. And apologist Dr. Bobby Conway of 1 Minute Apologist channel on YouTube. Bobby and Brian, thank you for being on the program today.
You are welcome, Michael David. It's great to be on the program with you.
Well, I enjoyed listening to you yesterday with Dr. Tony Evans and Jonathan Evans.
Wasn't that great?
It was amazing. It was amazing. Really a blessing hearing what everybody had to say.
I really enjoyed interviewing. You know, Dr. Evans was a little bit of a struggle just because we were on the phone and the phone was breaking up a little bit. But then with Jonathan, it was great because he was on the screen, and I was able to kind of just look him in the eye and have a great conversation with him. So
he seems like such a nice guy. I was listening as I was driving along, and I got to hear the Jonathan part, and I want to go back and hear the Tony part. But just your compassion and drawing out questions and being a reconciler was just so encouraging. And then just to be able to hear Jonathan's heart as well was just uplifting.
Yeah, and you probably heard we talked a little bit about his age, 38 years old, and, he's kind of at the far end of the millennial spectrum. But, just talking about his generation and kind of what, because he's like the college pastor at his church, and just sort of getting a feel from him on what his generation is thinking about all the stuff that's going on. And it was good to hear, and it was great to just see a young guy. 38 to me is young now. When I was 38, I probably thought I was old, but now I think 38 is young. But just a guy who I think, he has a really good perspective on things. And to me, that's super hopeful for the future, because that's what you need. You need people that have a good biblical grip on life and reality and all the complex things that we're having to deal with these days. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to ask you, Dr. Bobby Conway, so give us a little synopsis of your conversation with Brian Loritz. So Brian Loritz is a very he's a well-known spokesman within the African American community as far as a church leader. He's brilliant. He's pastored, several different places. Pastored in Memphis. Did a little bit of ministry in New York City. Most recently been up in the Bay Area here, but then even more recently has gone back to North Carolina. You guys are good friends. You had a YouTube conversation with him. Just give us some of the highlights.
I think one of the things that we wanted to do is just model being us live, because we do have a deep friendship, and we felt like it would be helpful to just allow our audience just to see two friends interact and learn from each other. And Brian has been so helpful in educating me as it relates to the history of the struggle that African Americans have went through in this country in particular. And so he's really been gracious in allowing me to ask questions, because I think that we all have questions and we need to feel like we can ask them. But a true relationship is what gives us the permission to ask those questions. And so when we build a relationship with each other, then we can say, hey, this is how I grew up, or this is what I heard, or this is what I've always thought. What is your thoughts on this? And because some questions can even sound racist, and I don't think that just because people are asking questions means they're a racist. I just think that some questions are so, they got a lot of stigma and they're hard to ask. But I don't think we're going to get to that real place of reconciliation and understanding and oneness and validation if we don't have the kind of relationship that can ask. So our goal was, let's be us. Let's ask the kind of questions that I think. So for me, I was like, well, what kind of questions do I think white people have in this time that Brian could provide perspective, and vice versa. And I think that is just one attempt, and it's been encouraging, like you're hearing as well. Yeah. Just people seeing you get on with, the Evans family, or me talking to Brian, we got Michael in studio with us. I mean, this is great. I mean, people can hear.
And we're going to put him on the spot.
We're going to put him on the spot.
People don't know I'm African American, just in case you can't see the video of what you're looking at right now.
And about as friendly of a person you'll ever meet. My goodness.
And you would easily mistake him for a
Darryl Strawberry?
Center. No, for a center for the LA Lakers or something. Because Mike is the tallest person on our staff.
Right.
That is a fact right there. But going back to that, what you were saying, Bobby, it's really so true. And, I was in a conversation the other night, before I had the conversation with Dr. Evans yesterday. I was in a conversation on Facebook Live with Pastor James Meeks of Salem Baptist Church in Chicago, Pastor John Jenkins of Glenarden Baptist Church in Maryland, Charlie Dates of Progressive Baptist Church in Chicago, along with Johnson Bowie from Victory Church in Atlanta, Georgia, and then a lady named Laurel Bunker, who's part of the Converge ministry, and Ed Stetzer was hosting, kind of organized the whole thing, yeah. And John and James and Johnson, we're all friends because we're all in a master's cohort together. But my point after all that is that John Jenkins said something that was really beautiful. He said, we need to be able to have the kind of relationships that we can talk about the hard things and even disagree, and even at times butt heads, and even, weep together at times, but then be able to just come back and say, okay, let's move forward. And I think that is true. We do have to ask some questions. I listened to a podcast today from a couple of guys, and a couple of young African American leaders, and I thought, man, I'd love to ask these guys some questions, but a couple of questions I would ask would be kind of hard because I felt like, they got a bit of an edge on them that I think. I mean, I understand it, but I think as a Christian, there are just certain things you gotta get under control by the Spirit. I understand people are upset. I understand people are angry. I understand people, this has just gone on way too long. I understand all of that. But I think we also have to remember we're followers of Jesus, and, Jesus could be mad about all kinds of things because the world that he created is really screwed up, right? But, he's still gracious. And so, we, anyway. But Mike, what do you, you're a voice that rarely personally, speaks up on much. I mean, your job obviously is to host programs and, be the guy that you're being right now. And but of course you have a personal perspective on a lot of this stuff, I'm sure. Would you mind weighing in and just sharing a few things about how you feel?
Well, I mean, sure, just a few things, because especially with what happened with George Floyd and everything, and I got to talk to my mom about this. My mom grew up in Alabama along with my dad, and they grew up with segregation, segregated schools, all the Jim Crow laws and everything. And my aunt marched with Martin Luther King and everything, and she said what happened with George Floyd and all the protests and everything, it reminds her of the 1960s. Yeah. It seems very, very much, I mean, all the protests, the police brutality, the riots, everything, it just seems to reflect that same sort of thing. Yeah. My dad actually passed away sadly earlier this year, and as I look at the world moving forward, it does, I mean, especially with this happening in a pandemic on top of all of that.
My goodness. Right.
I realized my experience growing up was very different than his. I grew up in Southern California in a multi-ethnic school, predominantly Caucasian at that time when I was growing up in the 70s and 80s. And I have opportunities that my dad could never dream of having, Right. But one thing about my dad is he was one of the kind of people who, even though we moved to an area where he was not from, he's just had an attitude, just get out in the community and just be a part of it, get in there and, and he would coach sports and he would get us and stuff like that, and it was a different world, but his whole attitude was, you've just got to contribute, you've got to be out there, you just got to try to be the best you can be, and that's what I've always tried to do, and that's worked well for me, but I also understand that the issues that are being addressed, that I commend you, Bobby and Brian, for taking the initiative to talk to the pastors, talk to the leaders, and I really think the church is going to be the one that's going to solve the problem.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's what I know. That's what Dr. Evans said. He was so bold as to say the church created the problem, so that it's only the church, or the problem's not going to get solved unless it first gets solved in the church. Yeah. And I think that is there's a lot of truth to that. So
one thing I wondered in reflection a little bit, I know that they've changed it from a third degree to a second degree charge. And, just some of the things that I've been listening to just to try to understand law, that could be a dangerous move, it sounds like, where now it might sound like, oh, this is a harder charge, but it's also harder to prove. Mm-hmm. And so in the event that it's not proven that there was intent to do this, according to what second degree legality would have, then you got a chance where there is no justice and he walks. And so I found myself thinking, wow, we really got to want the right kind of justice to be served. I mean, what exactly is it so that you don't go in too little or too much and miss justice being served in this event? And so I just think that's an interesting legal point, because I want our audience to understand that, wow, that might seem like we're really, up in the ante here. Well, it could shoot us in the foot when we're looking for justice. What are your guys' thoughts on that?
I knew that they were talking about changing the charge. I didn't know that they had done it. And that is an interesting thing, because of course, first degree murder is premeditated murder, right? You plan to do this. So this seems more like it's the heat of the moment and all of that. Yeah. So but nevertheless, with second degree, I think that there is it might be a more difficult thing to prove that, because you somehow got to still get into the heart of the person.
That was his intent in that moment.
Yeah, that was his motive. Yeah. So I mean, I don't know, but all of these things. I mean,
it's complex.
There've been so many where there has been. The problem is there has been no justice. I was just reading John Perkins' story. I read a few of John's books, but I never actually read Let Justice Roll Down, which is really more like his biography, autobiography. And he talks about his brother Clyde, who was shot down by a deputy marshal in 1947. He was a World War II veteran. He had lived through the battle with the Nazis and everything, and he comes home and he's standing on a street corner waiting to go into a cinema, and he's confronted by a police officer for nothing really, but just kind of a harassment thing, and the officer pulls out a club and strikes him. And now this guy is a guy who'd just been through the Second World War. He's not really gonna take that, so he kind of resist in the sense that he just doesn't let the guy strike him again with the club. And in doing so, the officer becomes enraged, takes two steps back, pulls out his pistol, and shoots and kills him. And is never even charged. He just goes on his merry way, and that's the end of it. And you look at stuff like that, and you're just like, wow, man, this is heavy stuff.
Absolutely.
And so when you see these things that we've seen in the culture, all of these years with the different deaths that have taken place. And now I saw something today where the Ahmaud Arbery, there's testimony going on in court, and one guy is basically testifying that because the question is, was this really a racist thing, or were they just concerned that this guy was vandalizing or whatever? And this guy testifies, yes, these were the words that they used, which were definitely racist words. So anyway, but yeah, Mike, thanks for sharing that.
Absolutely, Mike.
I appreciate that, and we just we love you. You've been here forever. You're you're just a part of the furniture here at K-Way. And it's just always a pleasure.
Mike is easy to love.
It's always a pleasure to do stuff with Mike. We don't get to do it that often, but every now and again, Brian has a nervous breakdown and he needs an hour off, so Mike can step in.
What a pleasure! What a pleasure! But I do want to say, with the officer going to the second degree, if they charge him for second degree and he gets off, would they be able to reduce it to third degree and try it again, or no?
That's something where that's an interesting question. I don't know the legalities of that. I would imagine, if I'm just my gut speaking, that they're going to do whatever they got to do to figure out how to bring justice. So I don't know exactly what all the loopholes are in this. And you even think in the scriptures, sometimes God, there's people that become sort of the object lesson. I'm thinking of Ananias and Sapphira, or in the Old Testament, when the sons of Eli, are disgraceful in their actions, and they become the object of that. And that's a tough place to fall, because no one ever wants to be the object lesson of justice. But sometimes we need an object lesson of justice, and even the scriptures show us that in place. As far as answering that technically, I'm not a lawyer, so I couldn't speak for that, but I will say this, you will have piqued my interest, because I don't like not knowing, so I'll go study it when I leave.
You can give us the answer later.
That's right.
Yes, but can you imagine what would happen if they tried him for second degree and they didn't get him, and they said, okay, that's it, he goes clean, scot-free?
See, that's where I think you're right. The riots would really go crazy. I mean, can you imagine?
I think a lot of people would be upset about that, yeah.
Boy, well, I would think
I would be upset.
Yes,
Yes.
Yeah, so... so there's still, I haven't really paid attention to the news today. I've been pretty busy all day. Still, it's like the rioting, looting kind of stuff. Is that still happening in different places?
Go ahead, Bobby.
I was going to say, when I went to bed last night, things were calming down a little bit. I would hope today, I know with the memorial service taking place, that hopefully that is assuaging some of the angst. I loved the moment. I didn't get a chance to watch it all, but they took the 8 minutes and however many seconds that the officer's knee was on the neck of George Floyd. They ended up having a moment of silence for 8 minutes and that many seconds.
Wow.
You talk about a powerful, take this in.
Yeah.
And imagine having that much time fighting for air.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Wow. Was there a gospel moment in that service that you saw, or?
I didn't see I didn't get a chance to see it all. I'll look forward to reading some of the reviews and stuff on how it went, but it looked touching.
Yeah.
I saw that, and then I noticed that Al Sharpton was giving a presentation as well.
Right.
I don't know who all spoke.
Yeah.
Now, where I was in Garden Grove, I can't speak across the nation, but there was streets blocked off and some buildings boarded up because there was going to be a protest, and the protest went through and it was peaceful. And I think a lot of them were peaceful.
Yeah, and I think there
was
a protest today. I think there was one yesterday right in our area. I heard that there was one in Newport Beach that got a little out of control. That somebody tried to ram protesters with a car. Don't quote me on that, but somebody told me that.
Yeah, I see Deloy shaking his head yes back there, kind of affirming that took place. And
Deloy knows everything, so if he's shaking his head
Deloy
yes,
does. Deloy knows his stuff. Yes, if we're talking and we're just not sure, just look for Deloy. He's sitting in his arbiter chair and he shakes his head no or yes.
And that's kind of that's pretty scary and sad that that's taken place. But I don't think anybody was injured or.
Do you feel like the population? I mean, look, I think my gut instinct would be that. I mean, obviously, it's terrific when we got to get, it moving into things like stealing and theft and beating people up and doing harsh riding like this. But I do feel like that would be more a radical fringe feel of people, and by and large, it would be the peaceful protests because the attention sometimes get put on some of the fringe stuff, right? Like anytime you get an evangelist goes out with a billboard and starts saying, God hates fill in the blank, you're going to fry in hell, people get that picture of, all evangelism is bad. And I think that not all protest is bad, but I'm personally really uncomfortable when it turns to violence.
Oh my gosh!
Yes. I agree.
Absolutely.
And I have to say, I mean, I'm all for peaceful protest. I'm against looting, and vandalism and theft.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm against that totally.
There's no excuse for that.
anyone.
And I think really, I think everybody who is really for, true justice and healing has to take the position of condemning that. I don't think you can even. Because I've heard some guys try to I know it's bad, but you have to understand the frustration level. And I would challenge that because I honestly think most of the people looting and burning, I don't think they're really doing it for those reasons.
I agree with you.
think they're doing it with completely, they're just, anarchist type of mentalities, or they're like, I'm going to get some stuff. As a matter of fact, I saw one guy who was, he was looting and he got busted in L.A. And the news guy interviewed him and asked him, why are you doing this? And he said, to be honest with you, I just wanted some stuff. And he was really, it was
so
great.
He's an honest thief.
He said, and so the guy says, well, wait, is it about the George Floyd incident and stuff? And he sort of paused for a moment and he goes, maybe a little bit, but honestly, it was just more about I could get some stuff. And you just thought, well, at least the guy is being honest. Thank you for that moment of honesty. But I do think that he's representative of many, especially those ones, the looting and all of that. Of course, that's what that's about. But the peaceful protests, I think, are fantastic. I think it's wonderful. I saw a clip from, again, my friends in Chicago. They did a peaceful march the other day with thousands of people. Mm-hmm. And it was beautiful, and it was good for them.
Yeah,
that is great. So I think all of us. Somebody asked me, "How come you're not marching?" I don't feel called to march. I mean, I might if my friends in strategic places around the country called me and said, "Brian, would you come and march with us?" I would. I don't feel a need to march around Orange County. Mm-hmm. I feel like let's all do what we can do.
Yeah,
let's do our part to. Move this conversation forward and to get this racist issue further and further behind us. And so,
Well, you're a lead pastor of a church.
Yeah.
And that comes with a ton of responsibility.
Yeah.
And people whose silo passion might be activism and doing these riots would love to pull you into that. But the truth is you have a lot of moving parts to oversee, and this program gives you the opportunity to be a voice. As it relates to the foundational issues, O'Brien, I've been thinking, we talk about America and how God's hands on this country and how we're the blessed country. And I look and I go, God, you are gracious and you have blessed our country. But I don't think that God I don't think we're the apple of God's eye by any stretch of the means as America. I think God loves all nations.
Yeah.
I think that the gospel is for all nations. And I think that God has blessed us in spite of us, because I think we had three major moves that we have to really dialogue about. Number one, was it okay to protest against King George to begin with, in that way? And what are the consequences of that setting up a maverick, individualistic spirit that we see in America? Number two, slavery and the issues that we had. And how has that affected us? Well, we're seeing some of that. So we got individualism, we have this. And then the Native American land. So we revolt because we feel oppressed, and then we oppress. So I'm just saying our foundation, I think we had a much bigger black eye than we talk about. And I think it's probably fair to realize we might have some consequences.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yep.
Deep.
And that will get you in trouble.
Yeah.
People don't want to hear that. But you know, if you really want to be honest and think it through, you do have to factor those things in. You know, and again, I think we might have even mentioned it last week. But you know, you just think of the Christian divide over the Revolution back in the 1700s. You know, there were people. Of course, what we know as you know, America back then was Britain. They were British colonies, and there was a revolt against the crown, but there were plenty of people in the country who did not share the sentiments of those who were revolting. They thought we should remain loyal to the king, and there were evangelical leaders who were divided over it. And I mentioned, you know, George Whitefield was pro the revolution in the sense that he thought breaking away from Britain was the right thing. John Wesley, an equally powerful voice at the time, was completely opposed to it. He thought it was a violation of Scripture. So, you know, you're going to get different opinions on this, and we just have to somehow, you know, love each other through the difference of opinions.
It takes time for us to really study history and become aware of the different issues, and we can't just go read history and get the one side. We need to read both sides, and we need tools of reasoning and discernment to help us to derive good opinions on this. So as it relates to, like, for me, I go flat out, I think it's wrong what we did to the natives. Flat out slavery, we could see that's wrong.
Yeah.
The question I would be interested in looking a little bit more into personally would be, you know, at what point is revolt okay? And to go a little bit deeper into what they were experiencing and what they were feeling to really know where my position is.
Yeah. And I've read some on that over the years. You know, I've read a few volumes on the subject, and I mean, it is interesting, and it's hard. And of course, you know, because you live so far after it, and you see, you know, the benefits and the blessings and the many good things about the nation. It's easy to look back and say they did the right thing because America had to come. Look, I mean, look at the look at the stuff we've done, and people have wanted to come here from everywhere, and all of that. And so you can kind of read back into the events from, you know, your own experience and say, well, of course they were right to do that. But if you go and get into the details of what was actually going on at the time, and, you know, this is where in so many things you have to take the providence of God into you have to factor that in, right? And with the providence of God, which means that God is allowing things to happen in certain ways that will ultimately fulfill the plan and purpose He has, although you wouldn't say He's directly orchestrating them, because then you would become a hard Calvinist, and you would have to blame God for all the sin and suffering and misery in the world, which I refuse to do and do not believe that you should do. But, you know, but even sometimes, you know, I think when we look at, you know, different things in history, we do have to have the biblical lens, and we do have to recognize that, okay, yes, this stuff, there was probably a lot of wrong about this, and men are culpable, and they'll pay the price for their sins. There's no question about it. But God's used it to further His ultimate purpose, you know, of bringing Christ back and setting up a righteous kingdom a kingdom of righteousness and justice.
And our accountability is going to be so much deeper because some people could be born into certain false ideologies, and still, because the moral law is written in their heart, they can intuit it's wrong. But boy, there's just no excuse on some of these issues. Why are we struggling with racism in the 21st century? Well, the fallen nature, but it's sad that we do.
Yes, a wonderful conversation. We're going to get to your calls this next half, 888-564-6173.
Pastor's Perspective continues in just a moment. Stay with us. Welcome back. Pastor's Perspective continues with your question to 1-888-564-6173. Now, here's today's host, Michael David.
Hello, welcome back to Pastor's Perspective. I'm Michael David here with Brian Broderson of Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa in Southern California. You can learn more about him at backtobasicsradio.com, along with apologist Bobby Conway of 1 Minute Apologist. It's a channel on YouTube, and it is 2 Hour Thursday, so you will have 2 hours to call in today, both this hour from 3 to 4 Pacific Time and also from 4 to 5 Pacific Time as well. So if you don't get through on the first half, stay on hold. You will be able to get through on the second half and even call back after 4 o'clock, and you can probably get through at 888-564-6173. In fact, we have a line or so open now, so give us a call, 888-564-6173. We were talking in the first half about things going on in our world right now. We are going to get to the phone calls, but I wanted to start off with a Facebook question, and it goes along what we were talking about the first half. And this one comes from Kathy and Paul. And she says, we've been hearing the words peaceful protest. Is this somewhat open to interpretation? Are there specific boundaries that must not be crossed in order to remain a peaceful protest? And when we talk about wanting things to change, referring to racism, can you give us concrete examples of things that need changing? In other words, educational programs, attitudes in general, or more interracial churches? Brian, why don't we start with you?
Okay. Yeah, I was trying to remember the first part of the question. The first part of the question, even constitutionally, of course, peaceful protest, that's called freedom of speech. So, we are obliged by the Constitution to be able to, protest, to speak up, to say what we feel, and not to be silenced by our government. So that's just part of our system, which is a good thing. And of course, so peaceful is the context in which that sort of thing is to take place, where you're not rioting, where you're not looting, where you're not burning and pillaging and killing, because in some cases, sadly, some people have been killed as well in these riots. So, and of course, there's nothing in Scripture. You think of the Apostle Paul. Paul was a citizen of Rome, and he experienced a little bit of police brutality on occasion, and he pulled out his citizen card. And you might remember there was an occasion there in the book of Acts, around chapter 24, where Paul is about to be beaten. And just before they start to beat him, he says, "Is it lawful to beat a Roman citizen?" And they're like, "What do you mean? Are you saying you're a Roman citizen?" Paul said, "Yes, I'm a Roman citizen." So the guard stepped back and went over to the commander and said, "Hey, we better be careful. This guy's a Roman citizen." And then also in Philippi, when Paul was jailed in Philippi, and then the authorities found out after they had beaten him and jailed him that he was a Roman citizen. Remember, they sent and said, "Okay, let's sweep this under the carpet. Let's get him out and just send him on his way." And Paul's like, No. You beat me, and I'm a Roman citizen. We're going to talk about this publicly. Yeah, you're host. So I mean, this is an example of protest. So we can do that, and we should do that at times. So the other question was, what kind of
Solutions.
Changes? Yeah, and there's two levels, and Dr. Evans, if you didn't get a chance to hear my interview with him yesterday, you should listen to that on the Pastor's Perspective YouTube channel. You can find it there because he laid out, I think it was 4 different things, and it started with personal. Make sure our own hearts are right toward people of other ethnicities, and if they're not, then we need to confess that, and we need to ask God to help us, and we need to realize that we are all people made in the image of God. The pigmentation of your skin does not differentiate you in any way, shape, or form from being created in God's image. So we need to start with that. And then he talked about, within families, we need to do what we can and reaching out on a family level, in the community level, the church level. But the big conversation right now is really more about on the institutional level. And this is where things need to change in the nation, because you have things that were built into the system from the early days that are still producing injustice today in the culture, especially toward Black Americans. And so that's where, on the church level, the church needs to acknowledge that that is true, that is a reality, that these are manifestations of injustice that should not be allowed. Now, the church can say that. That doesn't mean the government's going to change, but that's where, people get within the government as Christians, as believers, and they work to make a change. They work to make a difference. But if you have, say, for example, Christian people who are saying there's nothing wrong, the system's fine, it works perfect, that doesn't help. That just perpetuates the problem. So it's a recognition that this is a real problem. It has been a real problem. And, in my interview with Dr. Evans yesterday, he was talking about in 1986. Now, I can remember 1986 pretty clearly. I was on K-Wave in 1986 because this station started in 1985. And
You're a young buck.
I started broadcasting then. So, but Dr. Evans was talking about how many stations around the country in 1986, he was not welcomed onto the stations because he was an African American.
Yeah, that's insane.
And they were very candid, just saying, "I'm sorry, we can't bring you on our station because our listeners just wouldn't, they just wouldn't appreciate a Black voice." Okay, that shows you there's something wrong with the system, and not just outside the church. That he's talking about inside the church. So, I mean, again, we can do some things to help what's going on outside the church, but we first of all let's make sure the church is squared away on this. Let's make sure that we are crystal clear about the fact that we are genuinely all really like the Declaration of Independence said, we are all created equal.
Yeah.
Amen. All right, Bobby, did you want to say anything?
Those were good words. I mean, it's just entering into conversation and listening and talking and dialoguing. And I think that it's going to take some time. I know that at times I think that the African American community can feel from, the Caucasian community that, hey, let's just sweep it under the rug. It's time to move on. And I think that we need to listen. I think that it would be wonderful if we could figure out what it really would look like to experience a win in our culture, though, so that we could say, look, we had a bad foundation, and we recognize this. We acknowledge it. How do we get a fresh start? Because if we're all in alignment, what does that really look like in order to give that to us so that we can move together as one and do the best to bury? I don't think this side of heaven you're going to bury the race issue completely, because I think it's not an American problem. I think it's a human problem.
It's a human problem.
And I think it exists systemically throughout all cultures. And so I think that that's something that's always going to be there. We tend to, have that inclination within us, and it's unfortunate. But I do think, what could we do? If I was sitting around a table, I would love to figure out, well, what question can we answer that can move us to say this is a win, whereby we can really agree unilaterally that, hey, as far as saying this is the cause of the foundational issues, like where is the foundation cracked? Let's figure out where the foundation is cracked. What do we need to do to fix it? How can we come together and fix it? How can we move forward? Knowing that, because I think that we'll set ourselves up to be disillusioned, but could there ever be anything, like, I don't think we're going to erase racism completely, as I said, this side of heaven, but could we erase where we get to a point and say it's not because of this foundation. We've fixed that foundation. Now it's emerging because of these types of things in the human heart. That would feel like such a great thing to take place. And I don't know like how to get there, but that would feel like a nice thing. Like, can we just, what do we need to do to repent? Really repent, reconcile, and then we won't blame it on that anymore. Because right now, I think we can look to it and say, we have to deal with this, but let's deal with it and move on.
All right. Well, very good. 888-564-6173 is the number to call if you want to talk to Pastor Brian Brodersen or Dr. Bobby Conway. We're going to start with Thomas in San Diego. Thomas, you're on the air. How can we help you?
Hey, thank you for taking my call. So I'm listening to the conversation. It dawned on me. So from an African-American standpoint, what would you think is the question that the white or Caucasian side of the house, if you will, what is it that you feel like we need to understand that you see we're not getting?
All right, that's a great question. Since I'm the only African-American here, I guess I ought to answer that. But I want you to answer this too, though, okay? Because I think part of the answer is what we're doing right now. It's the public discourse. It's actually talking about this, getting it out in the open, not pretending the elephant in the room is not there, just actually addressing it and dealing with it. You know what I mean? And I think that's the big part. And also remembering the church is going to be the one that's ultimately going to lead the way on this for racial reconciliation. Okay, let's start with you, Brian.
Well, I think, Michael, I think that it's not only listening, but it's listening sympathetically. I think that is one of the things that's missing. I think that is a missing component, because I feel like my friends who are African American or Afro Caribbean or whatever they are, because I have both. I was in Britain and I have British friends as well. But I think they get the sense that people don't really care, because what happens so often is like, hey, get over it. It's we're talking about stuff that's hundreds of years old. I mean, we abolished slavery 200 years ago. You're still talking about this? I mean, come on. I feel like that a lot of times that's what is coming out. Whether it's coming out verbally, sometimes it's just the body language that's coming out. So when I say listening, I mean listening sympathetically, where you recognize, no, this is a real thing that a people group experienced and still continues to experience the ramifications of it in the modern day. It's not over. It still exists. So I think that's, to me, that's one of the things that I do feel, that it's not, I mean, here listening is important, but listening sympathetically and entering into the fact that, yeah, that is right, you know. And I think, you know, again, I've said this before, but I can sit from my perspective and I can look around and you know, Mike, you said it well, because your parents came from Alabama, where the race issue was very thick, and it was the air you breathed. You grew up in Southern California, and although I'm sure you experienced it to some degree, it was nothing like what your parents experienced, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So we can sit here from our perch. We're all perched here looking over the county, and we can look over the county, and I can say, well, you know, I don't really see much racism. I can look at our church. You come to our church. We're not a racist church.
No.
You know, I don't have racist sentiments in my heart. And then what I can mistakenly do then is say, well, what I see, I'm now assuming that that's the way it really is. But I have to be willing to listen to somebody to correct me and say, I know you think it's like that, Brian, but let me tell you what it's really like, because I live in it. You know, so when I talk to my friends in Chicago, in the south side of Chicago, oh, wow, they got a whole different experience than I do in Orange County, California. When I talk to my friends on the East Coast, and, you know, Bobby, you were in North Carolina for all those years. You talk to the black community there, oh, it's a different ballgame than it is here in Southern California. So we have to listen and recognize that, you know, we probably just are ignorant about a lot of this stuff, and we should listen to what people say. And not just be so quick to say, well, I'm not a racist, so I just don't think there's racism. Because that's what a lot of people are saying. People are saying that to me in response to some of the things I've said. You know, what are you talking about, Brian? There's not racism. You know, you're making a big deal out of this. And then they quote, you know, Larry Elder or Candace Owens or somebody, and see, they said that there's no racism. So it's okay. Well, those are two black people that said there isn't racism, but there's a bunch of other ones that say there is. So
yes.
And sometimes it comes down to politics, right? It's like, well, they hold my political position, so I'm going to go with their take on it.
Yeah, no, that's, they're going to, oh, geez. What would you say?
Well, I want to hear what you say first. Go ahead.
I mean, these are hard questions, but I think hopefully what we're doing is just modeling on air. I'm really glad you're in the studio with us too, Michael. You know, one thing that I would say, just that I mentioned to Brian Loritz during our time together, is I think sometimes, and this is a little off track, but it hopefully gives a little perspective. I think sometimes the white community is a little bit insecure on how to do relationship with the African American community, because we're worried about saying the wrong thing, right? So, for example, is African American the right thing, or black the right? And I know that as a white person, I don't want to get that wrong, right? And so when I talk to Brian Loritz, he says, oh, African American. Well, my daughter tells me, oh, well, some of her friends are saying it's black. And I'm going, that can be a hard place for us to get into conversation and community with our African American or black friends, because we fear that we're going to sound racist, but we're just confused on what to do. And so there's confusions that we have. And I would want to say, I think for I would hope, because I think we can make a lot of great advancement here on this issue, but I think that if we don't talk amongst ourselves, if it's not both-sided, then there's going to be frustration in the end. And I think that there's things that African Americans could really clarify for us, like why using the N-word when talking to each other. That can be a confusing thing, right? Or how to do some of that. So that kind of stuff is also helpful when we sit down and we talk and we're trying to connect. And so I think that if we can see us be in a situation where whites will approach, so why aren't whites getting into relationships? Because I think African Americans do a better job of community. I don't see a lot of white people go to black churches. I see African Americans go to white churches, right? And I see them being much more willing to do that than white people. And I think that, well, why is that happening? If white people will do a better job addressing why aren't I? Well, maybe it's because I'm worried that I'm going to say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing. And so how do we give each other permission to have the conversation? So like with Brian, I think he'd be great with me. Dude, you're not blowing it, bro. If you ask me a question on it, you're just looking, because you can feel like you're trying to fumble through this because there's a lot of different narratives going on, right? And I think that what Brian said as it relates to what we're missing is it's the foundational stuff. I think that that's the narrative the white community believes. We need to move beyond this. It's happened a long time ago, and it's just time to get past this. And I think that it's bigger than that. But I also think that there's questions like what I'm asking right now, like, hey, I think I told Brian, I would encourage you to be a champion saying, let the white people off the hook on whether or not you call us black or African American. We don't want them feeling insecure on that ground, right? Like, just let them off the hook on that, because it gets very technical to do relationship at times. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. What would you say to that, Mike?
Well, first of all, I appreciate you guys. Everything you said, I would agree with everything you said. And I know some white people who go to black churches, believe it or not. Yeah. So, I mean, it does happen. And I'm sure there's some listening right now who are white people who go to black churches. But I think something Dr. Tony Evans said yesterday that I thought was very pertinent was he said, do all churches have to be multi-ethnic? And he said, no, they don't have to be, because, people like different styles of music and different styles of preaching and everything like that. But he said it's more of a multi-ethnic mindset. Yeah. So we don't start thinking, this is a white church, this is a black church. This is a church. This is for the children of God. So we are open to everyone. We're trying to reach everyone with the gospel, and that's where our heart is, because God loves everyone. So I think that's where the heart has to be behind it, I believe, just like Dr. Tony Evans said.
Yeah, that's great, because you articulated that so perfectly. That's exactly what he said. Yes, he did say that. I remember that. No, that was good, Mike. And I thought the same thing. I told somebody else that that was a really good point that he made, because, obviously in some communities, you can't do a fake diversity thing. That's the worst thing to me. It's like, well, we've got to try to recruit a bunch of people so we have a ethnic diversity in our church. No, it's got to be natural. When I pastored in London, our church was about 50% black, and so that meant black British. That met many people from the African continent, people from the Caribbean, and so our church became a kind of an anomaly and an example in the community. And I remember people used to ask me, like, people literally wanted me to sit down with them and explain to them how did you do this multi-ethnic thing? How did you get all of these people together?
Is the vibe in the UK similar?
No,
because of the what I know with Wilberforce and all that. What's the hangover there?
It's different. It's different in the UK, but the race issue is nothing like it is here. I mean, not to say that it doesn't exist, but it's nothing like it is here. It's much more integrated. It's much more. You find mixed families all the time. Black man, white woman, black man, or vice versa. Nobody would frown on that or think twice about that in the UK. But anyway, my point is this: so people thought that I had some sort of a strategy, that I actually came with a plan to reach this multi-ethnic group, and I just said, look, here's what I can tell you: we open the Bible, we teach the Word, we love anybody who walks through the door, and presto changeo, that's how we ended up with what we got. So it wasn't rocket science. It's just the way it happened, So I'm going back to, I appreciated Dr. Evans saying that, because in some places, in homogenous communities, it is what it is.
Yeah.
If you're surrounded, if you got 30,000 white people around you and you're hoping to have a mixed church, good luck. It's probably not going to happen.
That'll take a real miracle, right?
Yeah, but your church should reflect your community.
That's right.
So if you have an ethnically diverse community, but you have an entirely unless it's for language purposes, you have just one ethnicity, then that is probably a problem too, and you should pray about how God would have you fix that.
Absolutely.
Yes, and also I want to thank you, Brian, for what you said about what happened in London, because you just loved everybody who came in the door, and that's what happened.
Yeah.
And the church grew as a result of it. It's sort of the same thing with Pastor Chuck in the 1960s. I mean, people would ask him, how did you build this huge church,
Yes.
And all he did was just loved those hippies,
loved the people that came.
and it actually came out of the same kind of a situation we're in right now, you know, so maybe God will do something through what's going on right now.
I think so. I think that's kind of the one exciting thing about it, where you see somebody pointed out we had rioting, we had the race issue, we had the civil rights thing, we had rockets going to the moon, and and then we had the Jesus movement.
Yeah.
And so it's like we kind of just hit the reverse button and we're right back there. So let's just fast forward to the Jesus part.
Yeah, we got SpaceX, rockets going off again.
That's what I mean.
Yeah, you're exactly right.
So who knows? Rockets going to the moon and the Holy Spirit falling on the earth. And maybe that's the next step, and we sure hope so, right?
It would be wonderful to have just a fresh, great revival, something that gets put in the books.
Yeah.
Would be really beautiful. We live in a time where this is hard. I mean, 2020, I bet there's never been more goals set than the 2020 vision of the year, and more goals disrupted. But it's in the midst of disillusionment. It's in the midst of confusion that, we get humble before God. He's the one that charts the course, and we need to look to him in a time like this and ask him to have favor on our country, and ask him to pour out his Spirit, and ask him to unify us. It's hard work. I mean, when God's Spirit falls out in a fresh way, God can accomplish more with one move of the Spirit than we can with all of our dialogue, with all of our reading.
Yep.
And I'll tell you, reading books, and it gets tiresome, and trying to have all this conversation, it gets so tiresome. But a fresh work of the Spirit can just really
fix a lot of things.
Real quick, right?
Yeah. Hey, Mike, seriously though, I want to just say thanks, because
Absolutely.
The great thing about this last hour is it's been completely spontaneous. So we didn't even come into the studio thinking. I mean, I seriously came into the studio thinking, okay, we've talked about this all week. We're moving on, and then I think the Lord just kind of directed us to have this conversation with you here today, Michael. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Michael.
Well, praise God. Well, thank you, Brian, and thank you, Bobby. Wonderful conversation. Thank you for all you do. And all of you who are on hold, stay on hold. We're going to get to you the next hour. You can call us at 888-564-6173. This is 2 Hour Thursday, so call us. I'm Michael David for Brian Brodersen and Bobby Conway. Have a good night.
Thanks for listening to Pastor's Perspective. We trust you've been blessed and had your question answered. Join us Monday through Friday and follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/Pastor's Perspective. The preceding was sponsored by Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa, California.